Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another action-packed episode of Monte Poker. In today's episode, you're going to watch us punt, misread our hand, chase and not get there, chase and get there, outflop and overpair, and much, much more. Thank you for stopping by, my returning subscribers, and for the new people out there, I bring to you Monte Poker, episode 21. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this first hand of the night brings us Queen Jack offsuit with $168 under the gun. Under the gun for the new players just means I am the third person to act once the new round of betting starts. It is not a great position, and this is not a great hand to be playing from this position. Regardless of that, it looks like we're going to stick around and put in the call just because so many people are already called here, so we're going to see if we can hit this board. So 4 of us going to this flop, $84 in the middle. The board runs out 7 deuce queen. We hit top pair on this board, but we have a marginal kicker, so we go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop aggressor to see what he does. And he's taking a very strong line here. He's betting $40 into 3 other opponents. This usually indicates that they have a strong hand such as ace queen rather, or king queen. So we're definitely behind here, but I decided to get sticky, put in the call, see what he does on the turn here. So I throw another $40 into this pot. The person to my left is going to think it over for just a moment, but eventually put his cards in the middle. So there are only 2 of us going to this turn. The turn is the king of clubs. Now, for some reason, I start lining up a bet and my opponent starts grabbing some chips to go all in. At this point, I probably should have just waited, pulled the chips back, and, you know, let him lead out and then just folded. But I got stubborn. I decided to call anyway. I said, nice turn, trying to represent that I had ace queen just because I didn't want to flip my cards over and look stupid because I was obviously beat in this situation and I should not have been in there to begin with. This was probably just a pre-flop fold. We decided to called all the way down and tried to push our opponent off of the hand when he was repping a monster, and it didn't quite work out. We jump back on our horse after that little mishap and add on some money back to our stack when we look down at ace-7 of clubs on the big blind. The big blind is the second position to act after the button when the new round of betting starts. So not much better than under the gun, but the money we have is already committed to the pot. So if nobody raises, we get to see a board for free. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. Somebody does end up putting in a raise to $17. I go ahead and put in the call. With this hand, we're really trying to either flop something like 2 pair or potentially flop a flush or a flush draw, meaning we have 5 little clubs there that pop up on the board. Going to this flop multi-way, we get just what the doctor ordered, 499 with 2 clubs out there. All we have is ace high, so I did decide to check this and the action did check all the way through. A 3 of diamonds came on the turn. This doesn't really change the board, so I decided to bet $15 in here to give us an opportunity to potentially steal this pot just in case our flush draw misses. Like I said, we only have ace high right now, so our hand isn't anything crazy. Our buddy Ed calls, but everybody else does elect to get out of the way, so we're going to go heads up to this river, which comes a 6 of spades. Now, like I said, we just have ace high. We didn't hit our club, so we still just have ace high. I'm really hoping he has a missed straight draw like ace deuce or ace 5 and that we can get him off here with a bet on the river. If he has a 9, there's no way he's going to fold. He asked how much and put in the call, so I'm assuming he does in fact have the 9. He shows us 8-9 of spades for trips, and our ace high is obviously no good. Sucks that we missed our flush. We definitely would have gotten paid by trips if the club hit on the river, but it is what it is. There's still a lot of poker to be played, so hopefully we can hit one later tonight. It doesn't take very long for the poker gods to give us another opportunity at a flush draw, as the very next hand we look down at ace 5 of hearts with 164 in our stack in the small blind. We're off multi-way to this flop, which comes out 9-9-3 with 2 hearts. I'm out of position, so I'm going to go ahead and check the action through. Luckily, one of our opponents does decide to bet $20 onto this board. One of the villains decides to come along for the ride. The player after him folds, the action gets back to me, and now we are priced in to see one more card. The 2 remaining players after me throw their cards away, and we go 3 ways to this turn, which comes the 7 of clubs. I go ahead and put in a check one more time to see what the flop aggressor decides to do here. He does put out a bet of about $60 here. The remaining player in the hand is now standing looking at the board. He takes a quick peek at his hand, looks at the board. This is usually an indicator that someone's going to fold, does it a second time, and then ultimately throws his cards in the middle. middle. The action is back on us, and it's going to cost us about $60 to make around 215. We're getting about 4-1 on our money with about a 15% chance of actually hitting our flush, which is not a great price for us, but I'm tilted and stuck, so I put in the call regardless. So we're off to this river heads up, which brings us the 8 of clubs. We don't have that much behind, and our opponent has even less behind, so I don't think we're going to get a bluff through here. I'm just going to go ahead and check. Our opponent shoves, and I instantly muck because we did not hit our flush. We are taking our third L of the session, but that's totally all right. The next hand of the night brings us pocket nines under the gun with 462 in our stack. I ended up having to reload for a bit, obviously, because we lost our first 2 buy-ins, so we are now on our 3rd buy-in. Anyhow, going to this action, I decided to bet $7 here. One person behind called, and then the player in middle position decided to raise to $22, which I found interesting. That's not really too big of a raise compared to our $7 that are already in here, but it is one of the biggest pre-flop raises we have seen since we sat down. Only been playing for an hour or so, so it's not massive. Anyhow, a couple people put in the call. There's no reason for us to raise here. If I had kings or aces, I would, but pocket nines, we just want to see a board. We're not likely to get a lot of people off of this hand. So going to this flop multi-way, the board comes 4, 9, 10 rainbow. Absolutely phenomenal. We flop a set, middle set at that. The only thing we're really afraid of is pocket tens. The short stack player ends up going all in, so I expect him to have something like ace 10 a lot of the times here. The action gets over to me. There's no real reason for us to raise. If we raise here, we're just going to scare off people with worse hands. So I do just put in the call, hoping a couple players stick around. Maybe something like 10 jack, queen jack, or maybe even 9 10. Unlikely because we're holding 2 nines, but you know, it could be there. And then to my surprise, the player in middle position, the pre-flop raiser, ends up jamming his entire stack in for about $300. I quickly put in the call, and we're going to go to this turn and river with $702 in the middle. Our opponent asks us if we have pocket tens. I tell him no, we have pocket nines, which is a good sign. Usually indicates he has an overpair. I show him the nines, he flips over queens, and we are looking to be in real good shape on this board here. We have no idea what the first opponent has, but as long as we fade a king and a jack or any single queen in the deck, we are looking to scoop this pot up. Going to this run out, the turn brings us a red ace, which eliminates his straight possibilities, meaning there are only 2 cards in the deck that could allow our opponent to win this hand, and that's when tragedy occurs. Psych, a black 10 hits the river, improving our hand from trips to a full house. The big blind mucks his hand without revealing it, and we scoop this ginormous pot. An hour and a half goes by before we have a relevant hand worth sharing, and it just so happens to be pocket nines under the gun +1. We limped in for 3 with the intentions of calling a raise, but nobody raised pre-flop, so there's only $15 in the middle. The board comes out 7-7-5. We might be up against a 7 with 5 people in this hand, so I do decide to check the action, and then a 4 of diamonds peels off on the turn. With this many people involved, I figured if somebody had a 7, they would have bet it on the flop. As I'm considering how much to bet on this turn card here into this tiny pot, the player under the gun decides to bet $20. Now I have a decision. If I think my nines are good in this spot, I can raise, or we can just call if we want to play it safe. Considering there was no pre-flop raise and there's multiple players left to act, I think just calling with the nines makes the most sense from this position, even if I do think they are best. So for those reasons, we do put in the call, and then the player in MP1 decides to come along for the ride. The other players fold, and we're off to this river 3 ways, which comes the 9 of clubs. We river a boat. The flush also gets there. What an absolute dream card in this situation. I'm looking over at the end of the gun player to see what he's gonna do. He does end up firing out for 20, and we definitely want to raise here. I don't know how much to raise. We want to get the call from either one or both of the players, so we don't want to go too large, but we also want to make it large enough that we make some sort of profit here. So I do put in the raise to $60, making the total pot $155. And then the under the gun player goes into the tank for quite a while. About a minute or 2 later, he does ultimately elect to fold. Don't know how he found that fold for such a small price, but I end up showing him that it was a great laydown, and we are sliding yet another pot in the right direction. Some time goes by and we look down at Jack 9 suited under the gun +1 with 980 in our stack. I limp in for $3 because we are in early position. If we were in later position and there wasn't a raise behind us, we would be able to raise a hand like Jack 9 suited. But since we're in early position, there's no point in raising. We're only going to get called by better. So we go to this flop 3 ways and the board comes out Queen 9 Jack with 2 clubs. Absolutely great flop for our hand. We flop 2 pair. Under the gun bets $7. I put in the call. The middle position player calls. Then when it gets over to the hijack, he also puts in the call. The button folds. Action gets back over to the big blind, who seems to be thinking this over quite a bit. Not sure why for this small amount, but he does also put in the call. 51 in the middle, and the turn comes a king of diamonds. Yikes, this is not a great card for us. This puts 4 to the straight out there with any 10. And to make matters worse, the big blind now does in fact decide to bet $30. We still have 2 pair and have an opportunity to improve to a full house if a 9 or jack ends up hitting the board. We also have 2 players behind that might put in the call. So for those reasons, I do decide to put in the call for $30. Fortunately, the player behind us folds before we even get the money out there. Action gets over to the hijack, who's thinking it over quite a bit here. I feel like he had a good hand but doesn't like that turn card, so he ultimately does end up letting it go. Only 2 of us are left as we go off to this river here, which brings the ace of spades, as if it wasn't bad enough. Man, absolutely terrible river card. I was pretty sure that we were already behind on the turn, but now we're losing to a ton of hands: ace king, ace jack, ace queen, obviously any hand holding a 10, and then our opponent decides to bet $70 on this river card here. We had some showdown value before the ace came out. Now there's no way in heck we're ever good here, so unfortunately we're just gonna have to let this one go. The following hand brings us to the small blind with 905 in our stack, where we look down at ace 8 of spades. Pretty solid hand, but nothing that we can go too crazy with pre-flop. There was a $6 straddle and then a raise to 12 bucks with a couple of callers in the middle. I do elect to just put in a call here. Like I said, it's a pretty good hand, but it's nothing crazy, and we're also out of position, so I don't want to go into this pot way behind. So we just put in the call. The straddler tries to check his option, but there's more money to be put in the middle, which we all found kind of funny. Anyhow, we're going to this flop multi-way. It comes out jack deuce 3 with 2 spades. We've been playing pretty passive all day, so I do elect to put in a bet this time with our draw. The intention is to build up the pot in case we do hit, and then if we miss, we have some credibility if we fire for 2 or 3 streets. So I end up betting $23 here. 1 player calls, 2 players fold. It gets down to the player in the hijack who thinks it over for a little bit. It's our buddy Efren, who we play with on a regular basis. He does decide to come along, so that just leaves 3 of us going to this turn card here, which immediately rewards us. 10 of spade comes on the turn. We turn the nut flush draw, and now we have a decision to make. How much do we want to bet? Do we go really big, or do we just go for value here? I decided to just go for value. I bet $40 into 130. Under the gun +1 folds, and Efren gives us some action here, putting in the call. We go off to this turn, which comes a king of diamonds. Unfortunately, this isn't a great card for us, because if Efren wasn't on the straight draw, he definitely isn't going to call now if he just had a jack, especially since the flush and a straight both got there. Now, that being said, if I were bluffing and missed something, I would just fire pretty big here. So I'm going to do the same thing with my nutted hands. I bet 150. He folds before I get the money out there, and we end up scooping another one. And the night brings us to the hijack with over $1,000 in our stack. We look down at queen jack suited and decide to raise for $16. They pre-flop straddle calls, but everybody else gets out of the way, and we go to this board with 9, 4, 10 rainbow. We have an open-ended straight draw, meaning we can hit either an 8 or a king here to make a straight. I'm thinking it over, trying to decide whether or not we want to bet at this board or not. I decide to bet for $20. It's about 2/3 of the pot, trying to just take this down here and scoop a small profit, but our opponent is thinking it over for quite a bit and does elect to put in the call. So we go off to this turn, which comes a 9 of clubs now. Potentially scary card. He could have just been floating us with second pair to see what we do on the turn, thinking we might have 2 overcards, which we definitely do, but we also have some outs here. So I decided to size up a bit. We bet $60, really try to put the pressure on our opponent and see how much he likes his hand here. If he thinks we're full of it and he has a good hand, he might raise us here, but he might also just flat if he only has a pair of 10s. Either way, since we've already fired for 2 streets, if our opponent does end up putting the call, we're going to have to go pretty big on the river and try to steal it if we do miss. And to my surprise, our opponent does put in the call. So 272 in the middle, we're off to the river, which brings us to 8 of hearts. We river the freaking straight. Absolutely fantastic. I love you so much, dealer. You are the freaking best. We were planning on going big on this river regardless, but now we can do it with confidence because we made our freaking hand. So now I'm just trying to figure out how big we want to go here. I decided to go with the bet sizing of about 150 for 2 different reasons. First off, it's significantly bigger than my bet on the last street. It's more than 2.5 times what we bet last time. And 2, it's the exact same size I took when we made our flush. Now, if you guys recall that hand, we made a flush, we fired 150 and Ephraim folded right away. Well, I know this player pays attention, and the fact that I used the exact same bet sizing that I used in another hand that I could have potentially been bluffing at and never had to show it is going to look a little bit suspicious. Is our opponent paying that close of attention? Who knows, but you know, that's what I told myself at this time, trying to get the call. And as I see our opponent grabbing some black chicks, I'm getting real optimistic. He does throw them in the middle. We show our straight. Our opponent does not have a full house, which is the only hand that would be beating us, throws it away, and we scoop the final pot of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Once again, it was another roller coaster of a session. Took a big dip at the start, but we brought it back in the end. Let's wrap up the vlog with a quick bankroll update, and we'll let you guys off the hook. But not before you like, comment, and subscribe. You guys see those new animations I made? Pretty sick, right? Anyhow, for this session, we bought in for $820, cashed out for $12.73. Total profit is $453, which brings our total profit to date to $7,916. Not too shabby. All right, everybody, that's it for this week's episode. Can't wait to see y'all next week. Thank you for stopping by, and good luck on the felt.